Imagine you're tracking a nation's progress, kind of like you track a friend's career. Over 30 years, they've seen this massive, like 45% growth in their baseline success rate. You'd think they've got it all figured out, right?
Yeah, you would definitely assume they are on the fast track to the top. I mean,
Mhm.
35% is huge.
It is. But what if I told you that the nations we usually consider the most, developed on Earth, the ones at the absolute top of the global leaderboards, are actually running a massive, completely unsustainable deficit?
Right. A deficit that the standard scorecards just conveniently ignore.
Exactly. And what if a country that's currently ranked like 143rd in the world in standard wealth is secretly outperforming all of those top tier nations on the metrics that might actually, save the planet?
It's wild. It completely flips the script on how we define a successful country.
It really does. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We have a seriously fascinating stack of sources in front of us today. We are looking at a comprehensive 30-year analytical report spanning from 1990 all the way to 2023.
And this is all based on the absolute latest United Nations Development Program data, right?
Yep, the UNDP data. And our entire focus today is on a single subject, which is Ghana.
Right. And I think we need to be clear about our mission here. We aren't just reading a spreadsheet of GDP growth or looking at standard financial numbers.
No, definitely not.
The mission here is to dissect the true cost of that growth. We really want to look at the underlying structures of society and figure out who is actually paying for a nation's progress.
Yeah.
Because someone always pays.
Always. And to do that, to really unpack this, we're going to be using a specific toolkit provided by the UN.
Right, they're diagnostic lenses.
Yeah, think of it like going to the eye doctor. You know how they flip those different lenses down and ask better or worse, one or two?
That's a great analogy, actually.
Yeah. Thanks. So each click of the lens reveals a completely new layer of reality. We're going to start with the HDI, which is the surface level, the Human Development Index.
The basic vitals.
Right. Then we'll click the lens and look at the GDI and the GII, which gives us the gender reality check.
Which is where things start to look very different.
Very different. Then we'll look at the IHDI, which reveals the truth about inequality. After that, we zoom in with the MPI to get a really granular look at multidimensional poverty.
Not just income poverty, but actual lived poverty.
Exactly. And then finally, the ultimate plot twist lens, the PHDI, which measures planetary pressure.
And as we apply these different diagnostics, the whole image of Ghana's progress is going to shift in ways that I honestly didn't expect when I first opened the report.
Same here. It starts as a pretty straightforward story of a developing nation trying to catch up, but it just quickly evolves into this complex, sometimes contradictory narrative.
A narrative about the actual future of global survival, really.
Totally. Now, before we get into the hard numbers, I want you, the listener, to just keep a question in the back of your mind as we go through this.
A framing thought.
Yeah. Think about how your own community measures success. Is it just, by the cars in the driveway or the median income of your neighborhood? Or do you measure it by the health of the community, how equally opportunity is shared, and whether that lifestyle is actually sustainable?
Keep that in mind for sure.
So let's start with those basic vitals. Lens number one, the surface level, 30-year climb, the HDI.
Okay, so the Human Development Index, this is essentially the standard global scorecard for human progress. It tries to look past just raw money by combining three dimensions: life expectancy, access to education, and standard of living.
The big three.
Right. And when we look at the data from 1990 up to 2023, we see a really steady 30-year climb for Ghana.
Yeah, I'm looking at the chart from the report right now. Globally, the average HDI rose from 0.60 to about 0.756 over that period.
Correct. And Ghana started much lower, right? They were at 0.432 back in 1990.
Which is pretty low on the scale.
It is. But by 2023, they had climbed to 0.628.
Okay, so doing the math on that, and I'm not a math genius, but that's roughly a 45% increase in their baseline development score.
It is a 45% jump. And what you really have to appreciate here is the stability of that climb.
What do you mean by stability? Like it wasn't a roller coaster?
Exactly. The data emphasizes that their compound annual growth rate has been incredibly consistent.
Okay, let me stop you there for a second, because compound annual growth rate is one of those terms economists just sort of throw around expecting everyone to nod along.
Fair point, fair point.
Just to make sure we're all on the exact same page, you're essentially talking about the smoothed out year-over-year average growth, right? Like if you invested money and it grew steadily over time, rather than having these wild boom and bust years.
That's a perfect way to put it. It smooths out the volatility. In real-world terms, it means Ghana hasn't relied on, say, a single lucky oil boom that artificially spiked their numbers for 2 years before totally crashing.
Ah, I see. So it's systemic growth.
Right. It's been this steady, relentless march upward. And that stability has firmly moved the country out of the low human development category and into the medium human development tier.
Which is a huge achievement. I
Yeah.
mean, a 45% structural increase over 3 decades is serious progress.
Absolutely.
But if we break down the HGI into its actual components, those three pillars you mentioned, life, knowledge, and income, the picture gets, well, a bit more complicated. Let's look at life expectancy and education first.
Good idea. So looking at 2023, life expectancy at birth in Ghana is 65.5 years.
Okay. And the world average?
The world average is 73.4 years. So there's a very noticeable gap there, roughly 8 years.
Right. But then we look at the education pillar, specifically the expected years of schooling.
Yeah, this is where it gets interesting. A child in Ghana can expect 11.4 years of education.
And the global average is 13.0 years.
Exactly.
So looking at those two gaps, the education gap is fairly tight. I mean, 11.4 years versus 13. It seems like Ghana is catching up to the global average in the classroom much, much faster than they are in the hospital.
That's a very accurate read of the data. Having an 8-year gap in life expectancy tells us that health infrastructure is just a much more stubborn long-term challenge.
That totally tracks, though. I mean, you can build a school, train local teachers, and standardize a curriculum relatively quickly, all things considered.
The turnaround time on education infrastructure can be faster.
But to raise the average life expectancy of an entire nation by a decade, that requires overhauling sanitation, ensuring clean drinking water, building specialized hospitals, managing, complex pharmaceutical supply chains.
It's a massive multi-generational project. Building a nationwide cradle-to-grave healthcare system is structurally incredibly difficult.
Yeah, and that health infrastructure challenge is heavily tied to the third pillar of the HDI, which is where Ghana's progress hits a really major wall.
You're talking about the standard of living, the income component.
Right. The report uses gross national income, or GNI per capita.
Yeah, and just to clarify for the listeners, they adjust this for purchasing power parity.
Oh, right, PPP. Let's quickly define that too. That basically means we aren't just looking at the raw, volatile exchange rate of the Ghanaian cedi to the US dollar, right?
Exactly.
We're looking at what that money actually buys on the ground, like how many loaves of bread or how much cooking oil a person can afford locally in Accra versus what it would cost in New York.
Precisely. It levels the playing field so we can compare actual living standards, not just arbitrary currency values.
Okay, so using that leveled playing field, what are the income numbers?
The global average GNI per capita is $20,327.
Okay, so if Ghana's education is almost at the global average and they've been growing so steadily for 30 years, I'd expect their income to be somewhat close, maybe, I don't know, 12,000, 15,000.
You would think so, based on the other metrics? But the reality is much harsher. Ghana's GNI per capita is merely $6,846.
Whoa. Wait, 6,800, that's barely a third of the global average.
Yes, it is roughly 1/3.
Yeah, okay, we need to unpack this because the math doesn't math here. If their education system is catching up so well, nearly 11 and a half years of expected schooling, why is the income lagging so drastically behind?
It's a great question.
Is income just a lagging indicator? Like, does it just take 20 years for an educated kid to grow up and start generating wealth in the economy? Or is this income gap an anchor dragging the whole ship down?
It's a bit of both, but it's mostly the anchor. There is a time lag with education, yes, but primarily this low income is a reflection of absolute historical wealth divides.
Explain that a bit more.
It's the mathematics of compounding on a disparate base. So think about it this way. If you have $100 and you manage a really impressive 10% growth, you now have $110. You gain $10.
Right, good job, me.
But if another country has $1,000 and they grow at a sluggish 2%, they still gain $20. They now have $1,020.
Oh, wow. So my growth rate was 5 times better than theirs.
Exactly. But the absolute wealth gap between you two actually widened.
So the rich nations get richer just by coasting.
Yes. Growth in percentages like that 45% jump we talked about doesn't immediately erase absolute historical wealth divides. And this massive absolute gap in GNI per capita is the primary reason Ghana's overall HDI rank sits at 143rd out of 203 nations.
So the income is completely weighing down the overall score, despite their massive progress in other areas.
Right. They are performing admirably in building their educational base, making
Mhm.
some strides in health, but the raw economic output, the legacy of historical global inequality, is heavily anchoring their rank.
Okay, so our basic vitals show a country working incredibly hard, right? Making great strides in the classroom, but struggling with legacy health infrastructure and a huge wealth gap.
That's the surface level, yes.
But we know averages lie. I mean, they always do. If you and I are in a room and I have two apples and I eat both of them, statistically, on average, we've each eaten one apple.
And I'm sitting there hungry.
Exactly. The average says we're both fine, but the reality on the ground is totally different. So let's click the diagnostic lens to the next setting and see who is actually getting the apples in Ghana.
Perfect transition. So, to do that, we look at the Gender Development Index, or the GDI. This takes that overall national HDI score, the 0.628, and splits it cleanly between men and women.
Okay, what does that show us?
Well, for Ghana, the baseline GDI is 0.933. The world average is 0.955.
So it's fairly close to the global average in terms of the ratio.
Yes, the UN places Ghana in what they call Group 3, which means they have a medium level of equality in development achievements between women and men.
But let's look at the raw scores beneath that ratio. The female HDI in Ghana is 0.607.
And the male HDI is 0.651.
So there's a clear gap.
Yeah.
The men are essentially living in a slightly more developed version of Ghana than the women are.
That's exactly what the data implies.
So why is that? If they are growing at 45%, why are women trailing behind the men in capturing that development?
To understand the root cause of that gap, we have to look at a phenomenon the data reveals, which we can call the education leak.
Ah, yes. This was the part of the report that completely hooked me. Walk us through the schooling numbers for boys and girls, because honestly, it starts off looking so promising.
It really does. Remember earlier we said the expected years of schooling for the whole country was 11.4 years.
Yeah.
Well, let's split that by gender. For Ghanaian girls, the expected years of schooling is 11.3 years. And for boys, it is 11.5 years.
That is almost perfect parity.
It is.
At the starting line, when a child is born, the expectation from the state, the society, and the family is that a little girl will get virtually the exact same amount of time in the classroom as a little boy.
That is the expectation, yes.
Yeah.
But, and this is a massive but, now we have to look at the mean years of schooling.
And just to clarify, mean years means the actual historical average, right?
Right. This isn't a projection or a hope. This is the actual average time spent in school by adults aged 25 and older. And the actual time spent in school for women is only 6.1 years.
Oh, wow. And for men?
For men, it averages 8.3 years.
That's a huge drop-off.
It's massive.
I mean, the intention is there, the enrollment happens, but this education leak drains away over 5 full years of potential education for young women.
Yes.
It's like pouring water into a bucket with a giant hole in it, or putting everyone on a high-speed train expecting to reach a destination 11 years down the line, but for the girls, the tracks just abruptly end at year 6. It causes a massive derailment.
That's exactly what it is, a structural derailment.
So what is structurally causing that? Why are they dropping out at year 6?
To find the missing tracks, we have to click our diagnostic lens again. We use the Gender Inequality Index, or GII.
Okay, what does the GII measure?
The GII measures gender inequalities in 3 specific aspects: reproductive health, empowerment, and economic status.
Mm-hmm.
And in the GII, Ghana ranks much, much lower. They rank 145th globally.
Okay, let's focus on that reproductive health piece, because I think that's the key here.
It's absolutely the critical factor. The data points directly to biological and healthcare realities, just brutally intercepting their education. Let's look at maternal mortality first. Ghana's maternal mortality ratio is 263 deaths per 100,000 live births.
And the global average for comparison.
The global average is 216. But perhaps even more directly related to the education leak is the adolescent birth rate.
Okay, what are those numbers?
In Ghana, there are 59.2 births per 1,000 women ages 15 to 19.
Wow, almost 60 births per 1,000 teenagers.
Yes. And the world average is 39.1.
Okay, we really have to connect the dots here, because we aren't just talking about abstract statistics on a page. We're talking about like a 15-year-old girl in a rural district.
Exactly.
She's in school. She's tracking toward that 11-year expectation we talked about. But if she lacks access to basic reproductive health care, right, or education or contraception, and she becomes pregnant, her trajectory completely changes overnight.
Overnight. The societal infrastructure just isn't designed to support a 16-year-old mother continuing her secondary education.
No, of course not.
The biological reality collides head-on with the weak healthcare infrastructure. And remember, we already identified health infrastructure as the weakest pillar of their overall HDI.
Right. The lower life expectancy.
Exactly. The lack of robust hospitals, clinics, and reproductive care isn't just lowering the life expectancy, it's actively pushing young women out of the classroom.
That is just, it's profound. That is the structural pain causing the leak. The societal expectation of equality at age 5 meets the harsh biological and infrastructural vulnerability of age 15.
Brilliantly put.
Yeah.
And because of this collision, women enter adulthood with over 2 fewer years of actual education than their male peers.
And far, far below their expected potential.
Yes.
Which naturally leads me to a huge question about the economy. Because if these young women are dropping out of school 5 years earlier than expected, what are they actually doing? Are they just staying home?
That's the logical assumption, right?
Right. Yeah, I'd assume that means female participation in the formal labor force is pretty low.
You'd assume that, but the answer leads to one of the most staggering findings in this entire 30-year data set.
Really? Okay, let's hear it.
Let's set the global baseline first. Globally, the female labor force participation rate is actually very low. Only 49.5% of women are in the recognized labor force.
Right. And men?
Men globally are at 74.1%.
Okay, and just to clarify for the listeners, that global 49.5% number is low, largely because millions of women globally are performing unpaid domestic labor. You know, childcare, elder care, household management stuff that simply isn't captured by standard economic participation stats.
Exactly. It's invisible labor to the economists. But in Ghana, the female labor force participation rate is an incredibly high 62.0%.
Wait, 62%?
Yes. And the men in Ghana are at 65.46%.
Are you serious? That means the gender gap in labor participation is almost non-existent there.
It is extremely narrow.
And 62% completely crushes the global average of 49.5%. Ghanaian women are incredibly active in the economy.
They are deeply, deeply embedded in the economic engine of the country. They are workplace active at rates far exceeding their global peers.
Okay, but hold on. Let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
If Ghanaian women are participating in the labor force at these incredibly high rates, almost equal to men, why is their specific HDI score so much lower? And why is their share of the wealth so low? I mean, if they are working that much harder than the global average, shouldn't they be generating significant wealth and pulling their numbers up?
This is the labor paradox.
Mm.
And it's where we really have to distinguish between labor quantity and labor quality.
Okay, explain that.
High participation simply does not equal high-yield formal participation. We have to connect this right back to the train derailment, the education leak we just discussed.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Because these women average only 6.1 years of actual schooling, they are largely locked out of the formal, high-paying corporate, government, or tech sectors. Those sectors require secondary or tertiary degrees.
Of course. The corporate jobs, the government desk jobs. They require the full 11 years of schooling. If you only have 6 years, your resume doesn't even get past the front door of the HR department.
Precisely. You don't have the certifications. So they are working, yes, working incredibly hard, but they are heavily, heavily concentrated in the informal economy.
Okay, let's paint a picture of that for the listener. What does the informal economy actually look like on the ground in Ghana?
The informal economy means running market stalls. It means engaging in petty trade, agricultural day labor, unregistered micro-enterprises.
Survival economics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Imagine a woman waking up at 4 a.m. to buy bulk tomatoes from a rural farmer, transporting them to an urban center, and sitting at a stall for 12 hours a day in the heat to sell them at a micro markup. It requires immense physical effort, sharp negotiation skills, and incredibly long hours, which is exactly why the labor participation rate is so high. They are out there grinding every single day.
But there's no safety net.
None whatsoever. There is no sick leave. There is no employer-matched pension. There's no easy access to commercial banking to get a loan to, say, buy a truck and scale up the tomato business.
Right, because they don't have formal business registration or collateral.
Exactly. If she gets sick, she earns nothing that day. It is a grueling cycle of pure survival economics.
That is just It's a profound realization. Labor without equity or leverage isn't empowerment, is it? It's just exhaustion.
That's a very stark way to put it, but yes.
I mean, they are working incredibly hard, but because the education tracks abruptly ended for them at age 15 due to reproductive health gaps, they are trapped in a cycle of low-yield, informal labor.
Yes.
It perfectly explains why high economic activity isn't translating into a high human development score. You cannot simply outwork a lack of capital and a lack of formal education credentials.
You really can't.
Mhm.
It's a structural ceiling. The effort is absolutely there, but the economic architecture of the country just doesn't reward it.
All right, this is heavy, but it's so important to understand. We've looked at the basic vitals, and we've looked deeply at how gender dictates the reality on the ground. Let's click the lens again. Let's move to our next diagnostic tool.
The IHDI.
Right, because we've seen how gender creates specific targeted gaps, but what happens when we apply a broad lens of general societal inequality to the whole country?
Okay, so we use the Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index, the IHDI.
What exactly does that do?
What the IHDI does is look at that national HDI score we celebrated at the very beginning, that 0.628, and it actively discounts it based on how unequally health, education, and income are distributed across the entire population.
I honestly think this is my favorite metric in the whole report.
Really? Why?
Because it essentially asks, how much of this progress is just an illusion created by a few incredibly wealthy or highly educated people at the very top pulling the average up?
That's exactly what it measures. It corrects for the billionaires skewing the average. And the data here is, well, it's a really tough pill to swallow.
Give us the numbers.
Globally, the average loss in HDI due to inequality is about 22%. Most countries have some level of inequality, obviously.
Right, nobody's perfectly equal.
But when we apply the inequality haircut to Ghana, it suffers a 36.5% discount.
36.5%.
Yes. It causes Ghana's actual lived development value to plummet from 0.628 all the way down to 0.399.
That is brutal. It's just brutal. Imagine earning a hard-fought paycheck, right? You've been grinding for 30 years to get a raise, but the moment the money hits your account, the bank automatically deducts a 36.5% processing fee just because of the flawed structure of your society.
That's the development fold in action.
More than a third of the progress they've made since 1990 is just locked away behind a wall of inequality. What exactly is driving this massive discount?
The sources show that income inequality alone contributes to nearly 51% of this massive loss.
So it's mostly about the money hoarding.
Yes, there is a very sharp, distinct divide between the haves and the have-nots in terms of wealth accumulation. But to truly understand what this inequality looks like, we can't just talk about percentages and discounts.
No, numbers get numb after a while.
We have to look at the human reality of the people on the losing side of that 36.5% discount.
Which brings us to another specialized tool in the UN kit, the MPI.
Right. The Multidimensional Poverty Index.
Okay, let's break this down. Because poverty isn't just a lack of dollars in a bank account, right?
Exactly. You can't eat a dollar bill. You can't use a dollar as shelter if there's no housing market to rent from. Poverty is a severe lack of fundamental daily resources. The MPI looks at overlapping deprivations.
Overlapping deprivations. What does the data say for Ghana?
Based on the 2022 survey data, 24.8% of the population lives in multidimensional poverty.
Quarter of the country.
Yes. And within that, 11.3% are in severe multidimensional poverty.
Okay, so a quarter of the country is multidimensionally poor. But break that down for us. What does multidimensional actually mean on, say, a random Tuesday morning for a family in that 24.8%?
The MPI breaks poverty down by what specific physical resources are missing in the household. And the drivers in Ghana are very telling. The largest single contributor to their poverty index is nutrition. That makes up 21.5% of the deprivation.
Wow. Just basic calories and vitamins.
Yes. The second largest is years of schooling at 16.9%. We've talked about how that impacts the economy.
Right.
And the third largest contributor, interestingly, is cooking fuel. That makes up 12.0% of the multidimensional poverty index.
Wait, I really want to pause on that last one. 12% of the entire poverty metric is driven by a lack of cooking fuel.
Yes. It's a massive factor.
I want you, the listener, to really imagine this. Imagine waking up and the first major hurdle of your day isn't, sitting in traffic or dealing with a stressful inbox at work or figuring out what to wear. Your primary hurdle is, do we have the physical combustible fuel necessary to cook whatever food we do have so we don't get violently sick?
It's a reality that is very hard to grasp if you've only ever cooked by turning a knob on a stove or pressing a button on a microwave.
Exactly. How much of your daily physical and mental energy, your cognitive load, would be completely drained just solving the problem of safe cooking fuel every single day?
It is exhausting. Think about the physical mechanics of it. If you don't have electricity or piped clean gas, you're relying on solid fuels, firewood, charcoal, or agricultural waste.
And who goes to get that?
Sourcing that fuel almost entirely falls on women and children.
Of course it
It
does.
might involve walking several miles a day, carrying heavy loads of wood, or spending a huge portion of your meager daily income from that market stall just to buy enough charcoal to boil water and cook a single meal.
And while you are spending 4 hours a day sourcing wood or charcoal, you are not studying. You are not innovating. You are not running that market stall we talked about earlier to make more money.
Exactly. The lack of basic infrastructure actively compounds the poverty. It's a vicious cycle. Furthermore, burning solid fuels indoors creates massive respiratory health issues,
Oh, right. The smoke inhalation.
which ties right back to the lower life expectancy we discussed in the very first section.
It's all connected.
It really is. You can see how the 36.5% inequality discount isn't just some statistical anomaly on a spreadsheet. It is the physical, lived reality of that 24.8% of the population inhaling smoke just to feed their families.
It paints a really tough, interconnected picture. I mean, we've seen this impressive 30-year climb on the surface. But underneath, we've found an education derailment trapping women in informal labor. We've found an inequality tax stealing a third of the nation's progress. And we have a quarter of the population struggling for basic nutrition and fuel.
Yeah, if we stop the deep dive right here, the diagnostic report looks pretty bleak.
It does. It looks like a country struggling under the weight of its own structural gaps. But we aren't stopping here.
No, we have one final diagnostic tool to apply.
And this is where the entire narrative of this report gets completely flipped on its head. Up until now, we have judged Ghana entirely by how well it conforms to a Western, highly industrialized standard of development.
Which assumes that high consumption is the only way to succeed.
Exactly. But what happens when we change the rules of the game? What happens when we actively penalize countries for destroying the Earth to achieve their high HDI scores?
This is where we introduce the PHDI, the Planetary Pressures Adjusted Human Development Index.
The ultimate reality check.
It really is. This metric asks a profound, almost existential question. Is a country truly developed if its lifestyle is globally unsustainable? Are they successful if they're actively borrowing against the future survival of the planet to inflate their current wealth?
And how does the UN measure that?
The PHDI discounts a nation's score based on two crucial things: carbon dioxide emissions per capita and material footprint per capita.
Okay, let's look at the global average first. When we factor in the environmental damage being done to achieve these modern living standards, how much does the world's average score drop?
The global HDI suffers a 10.05% discount due to planetary pressure.
Okay, a roughly 10% penalty for the global average. What is Ghana's penalty?
A mere 3.2%.
3.2%. That is radically lower. How are they achieving that?
Look at the carbon emissions data. Ghana's per capita CO2 emissions are a tiny 0.5 tons per person.
Half a ton. And the world average?
The world average is a massive 4.54 tons per person.
Wow.
And if we look at the material footprint, which measures the actual physical amount of raw materials extracted to meet consumption, demands the global average is over 12 tons per person. Ghana's is roughly half of that.
So let's just synthesize what this actually means. The highly developed nations sitting at the top of the standard HDI leaderboard, the ones with the $50,000 per capita incomes, are heavily subsidizing their high scores by racking up a massive environmental debt. They have high incomes, high life expectancies, and great schools, but they are emitting incredible amounts of carbon to keep that machine running. Ghana, on the other hand, is achieving its human development with incredible environmental efficiency.
Which creates what we call in the data a ranking migration.
I love that term, ranking migration. What does that look like?
Well, when you look at the standard unadjusted HDI rankings we talked about at the start, Ghana is 143rd in the world.
Right, bogged down by that low historical income.
But when we apply the planetary pressure adjustment, when we actually level the playing field to hold every nation accountable for sustainability, Ghana skyrockets up the leaderboard to 113th place.
A jump of 30 spots.
Yeah.
That is phenomenal. I mean, we spent the first half of this deep dive looking at how far behind Ghana is, but when we look at their planetary footprint, they are vastly outperforming the global average. It makes you wonder who is actually doing development right.
It forces a massive philosophical recalibration. The standard Western definition of development implicitly assumes that high resource consumption is the ultimate goal, that everyone should strive to consume like an American or a European.
But the math on that doesn't work.
Exactly. If everyone on Earth consumed like the top 20 nations on the HDI leaderboard, the planet would collapse ecologically in a matter of years. Therefore, the top-tier development model is fundamentally flawed. It cannot be replicated globally.
It's an illusion.
Right. Ghana's model, while currently suffering from severe inequality and infrastructure gaps, is infinitely more scalable for the planet. They are growing without destroying.
Let's bring all these threads together. We've run the full diagnostic. We've looked at all the lenses. When we look at all these metrics together, the steady baseline climb, the gender education derailment, the incredibly high but informal labor participation, the massive inequality tax, and finally this incredible planetary efficiency. Where does this leave Ghana? What is the prognosis?
The sources suggest Ghana sits at a really fascinating crossroads right now. They are defined by a unique paradox. A low-carbon, high-efficiency advantage battling against a high inequality, low quality of formal labor weakness.
It's quite the tug-of-war.
It is. They have massive structural advantages, primarily a highly active, resilient female workforce and an ultra-low carbon footprint that makes their development path genuinely sustainable.
But the weaknesses are painful. That 36.5% inequality loss, the education leak driven by reproductive health challenges, and the heavy anchor of low absolute income.
Exactly. So, based on the data, what is the roadmap forward? How do they navigate the road to 2030? The report points to 3 actionable takeaways to bridge this gap.
Okay, let's hear them. First one.
First, shrinking the discount. Ghana simply cannot afford to lose 36.5% of its development to inequality.
No, you can't build a future giving away a third of your gains. How do they fix it?
This requires aggressive tax and Social Security policies to redistribute wealth, specifically targeting those core, multidimensional poverty drivers we discussed.
You mean the cooking fuel and the nutrition?
Precisely. If you use state resources to invest in rural infrastructure to provide clean cooking fuel and secure food networks, you immediately lift that 24.8% of the population out of multidimensional poverty.
And you free up their cognitive and physical load to participate in higher-level economic activities.
It's an infrastructure investment that pays immediate human dividends.
Makes total sense. Okay, what's the second takeaway?
Closing the loop on education. The 2.2-year gender gap in actual schooling must be eradicated. And as we learned, you don't just fix that by blindly building more high schools.
Right, because the girls are dropping out due to structural health issues.
Exactly. You fix it by providing robust reproductive health care, lowering the maternal mortality rate, and structurally supporting young mothers so they can actually stay in the classroom.
Because if you stop the education leak, you transform that incredibly active 62% female labor force. They move from informal, low-yield survival labor in the market stalls into formal, high-yield economic powerhouses. That transition from informal to formal labor seems like the absolute key to raising the overall national income without needing everyone to just work themselves to death.
It is the ultimate unlock for their economy. If you credential that workforce, the income anchor lifts.
Amazing. And the third takeaway?
The third takeaway actually relies on the rest of the world, monetizing the green advantage. Ghana's PHDI performance is spectacular.
Yeah, the 3.2% versus the 10%.
Right. In an era where global capital is increasingly focused on climate change and sustainability, Ghana can and should leverage this data to negotiate for international climate transition funds.
Basically going to the UN and the World Bank and saying, look, our lack of consumption is actively keeping the global temperature down. We are providing an ecosystem service to the rest of the world, and it's time to send the invoice.
That's essentially it. They are protecting the global environment by keeping their footprint low. They deserve international investment that recognizes and rewards that sustainable trajectory.
Investment to help them build green infrastructure so they can raise their income without raising their emissions.
Exactly. True progress, as the data ultimately shows, leaves absolutely no one behind. Not the women derailed from the education system, not the 24.8% living in multidimensional poverty, and not the planet itself.
Wow. We have covered a massive amount of ground today. We started with what looked like a really straightforward 45% growth metric. Then we saw how the anchor of absolute historical wealth dragged the score down.
Yep.
We diagnosed the education leak that creates a paradox of women working harder but earning less. We found the invisible thief of inequality stealing a third of the nation's progress. And finally, we discovered the triumph of planetary efficiency, where Ghana proves that human development doesn't have to cost the Earth.
It is a remarkable, deeply multifaceted story of a nation actively building its future.
It really is. We've spent this whole deep dive looking at how the world measures Ghana. But looking at that planetary pressure data, it raises a profound question you should explore on your own.
I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah. When we adjust for the damage done to the Earth, when we penalize the massive carbon debt that props up Western wealth, who are the real developing nations, and who actually has the most to learn, think about that the next time you track a country's or even your own community's success. Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.